Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of our attendees joining us today for this latest Data Science Central webinar. This is Bill Voorhees, your host. I'm the Editorial Director with Data Science Central and also Chief Data Scientist for Data Magnum. So I'd like to start off our event today by thanking Tableau for sponsoring today's event. Tableau is a longtime supporter of the Data Science Central community, and we're honored to have them sponsoring our event today. Now, past webinars are available on demand at datasciencecentral.com, and if you haven't had the opportunity to view them, I encourage you to take a look. They provide very useful insight into a wide variety of topics of interest to our data science community. Now, today's webinar is entitled People Analytics, Airbnb Experimenting on Recruiting Efficiency. And before we begin today, I'd like to briefly review the format for today's webinar. Today's event will be an hour long. We have one presenter who I'll introduce in just a minute. There'll be 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A following the presentation, and this event is being recorded and will be available on datasciencecentral.com later this afternoon following today's live event. So I'd like to also encourage our attendees to provide questions throughout the presentation. We'll be reviewing and presenting them on your behalf during the Q&A portion of today's event. Well, I'm very pleased to introduce today's speaker, Belinda Bennett with Airbnb. Now, Belinda Bennett is a data scientist in people analytics at Airbnb. So after working on the platform data science team at Airbnb for 2 years, Belinda joined the people analytics team as the second member in early 2016. The People Analytics team partners with the Employee Experience team to deliver reporting and in-depth analytical projects on recruiting, talent, compensation, and employee surveys. Now, prior to Airbnb, Belinda worked in Austin, Texas on the strategy, reporting, and analytics team at uship.com. So, Belinda, thanks for being with us today. We're looking forward to your presentation. At Airbnb, People Analytics uses data science to analyze how to best recruit, retain, and develop the global Airbnb team. So in today's Data Science Central webinar, Belinda Bennett of Airbnb will discuss how the team scales their insights through data literacy and training, including the use of Tableau's powerful tool, which quantifies the impact of the company's interview process on their hired workforce. The democratization of data has led to individual empowerment and increased career potential. In today's DSC webinar, you'll learn more about the Airbnb data infrastructure design, which leverages the Applicant Tracking Systems API and reports from the HRIS, as well as how the team uses the Tableau R integration to analyze interview data with advanced analytics. Belinda, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. You can begin as soon as you're ready to go.
Thanks, Bill, and thanks to Data Science Central and Tableau for having me here today. I'm excited to talk with everyone. As Bill mentioned, today I will be talking about how Tableau enables people analytics at Airbnb. First, I'll tell y'all a little bit about Airbnb, since not everybody is familiar with our platform. So Airbnb was founded in 2008 by these three guys, Joe, Nate, and Brian Chesky. Airbnb is an online platform designed to connect hosts, that's people with extra space in their homes, with travelers. The website was first launched during a design conference in San Francisco. All of the hotels were sold out, so the founders saw an opportunity to provide housing to the stranded conference attendees. You can see our website has come a long way since 2008. Oh, it looks like we skipped over one of the slides. Let's see, so that was our website in 2008, and this is now our website in 2018. So what you're looking at here is a listing page. This is Tom's Bohemian Getaway in Sayulita, Mexico. I stayed there last December. Tom is a surfer, and so he was able to give us great tips on local secluded beaches. He also pointed us to the best taco spots in town. everyone knew Tom, and we felt like we really were able to get to know the people in Sayulita thanks to Tom's hospitality. Now, not everyone has space in their home to share. So last November, we launched the Airbnb experiences, which gives the opportunity for locals to share not just their homes, but experiences with travelers. So this is Rosalind. She's not able to share her home, but she's passionate about Detroit and fashion. She owns her own fashion line, Detroit is the New Black, and she loves to share about fashion and entrepreneurship in Detroit. With the launch of Trips, Rosalind became an Airbnb experience host. Now, in addition to booking an amazing stay in Detroit, you can book a 3-day immersion with Rosalind where you learn about the Detroit art scene over dinner, visit the Detroit Institute of Arts for inspiration, and visit Rosalind's shop and studio where you can print a tee with her iconic brand image. We believe at Airbnb that experiences is going to be transformational and enabling travelers to live like a local and ultimately to experience belonging while they're traveling. And that's our mission, create a world where anyone can belong anywhere. And how big is that world, you might be interested? Throughout all time, we've had over 200 million guests on the platform, with over 4 million homes in over 191 countries. You think about it, that's a lot of data. In addition to our platform growing, we've also seen the company grow. We're now at over 4,000 Airbnb employees. I'll talk a little bit later about our larger data science team that gets to work with the guest and host data. But now I'll tell you some more about my career journey that landed me on the people analytics team. And Bill mentioned a little bit about this. So now I'm on the people analytics team working with this data on these 4,000 employees. So my data journey with Tableau and Airbnb. In 2012, I started working at UShip in Austin, Texas on their data team. We use Tableau to automate sharing data across our product team, our sales team, our finance team, and our customer experience team. We were sharing information like the outcomes of our pricing experiments or new customer metrics. We were able to share out that data with those customers as well, thanks to Tableau Online. In addition, because our team was small at UShip, I was not only building the dashboarding tools, but I had the opportunity to work on the implementation and server administration. This served me well because when I moved to San Francisco in 2014 and started working for Airbnb, I was able to, again, work on Tableau implementation. Airbnb had just started working with Tableau at that point in time. I was on our risk data science team. And so in addition to working on automated fraud detection, our risk data science team provides support to the fantastic global risk operations team. And Tableau is a great tool to share the operational data globally. After working on that team for 2 years, I realized my favorite part of that work was helping my coworkers. I enjoyed helping the operations team do their jobs more efficiently, not only by providing data tools, but by educating them and empowering them to use data. Our data science team at Airbnb is centralized, so it's easy to move between sub-teams. That made it possible for me to transition to our larger customer service team. So I worked with that team and scaled out some of the learnings we had from our risk operations team for about a year. And then soon an opportunity came up to join the people analytics team. So I jumped on that. Now I'll tell you a little bit more about our people analytics team, as well as what we do. You may already have a people analytics team at your company, or you might be looking to start to build one out, or you might be looking to join one. After I talk about that, I'll talk about how we're addressing some of the unique challenges of scaling people analytics. And then finally, I'll share an example of our interview efficiency visualizations and how we leverage Tableau. So what is people analytics? That definition can vary from company to company. I'll share what it looks like at Airbnb. Our team supports what we call the employee experience team. So that team consists of our recruiting team, our HR business partners, our compensation team, our operations team. So those are covering the recruit and retain pillars. And then we also work with development, so our talent design and learning and development teams. At Airbnb, we have a unique team called Ground Control, and they are kind of in charge of scaling our culture. So they work on company events. They help people get more involved with hosting on the platform, pretty much anything culture related. And then finally, we also help support our workplace team, which includes our facilities team. We have many offices globally. Our team called the environments team. This is a very cool team. They design our offices and office space. And so if you ever get the opportunity to come check out the offices, I highly recommend it, as well as our food and safety and security team. Across all of those teams, the employee experience has a diversity and belonging lens. And so how do we support those teams? Our people analytics team aims to empower data-informed decisions for the employee experience. And we do that by first building up a strong infrastructure, and then on top of that, ensuring quality data, helping these teams define metrics for success. And once we have those three pieces of foundation in place, we can start to work on the fun, shiny work at the top, the futuristic stuff, our A/B testing and prediction. This is what the team looks like right now. So Susan, my manager, started the team over 2.5 years ago, almost 3 years now, and she held down the fort on her own for the first year, joined by one other data engineer. And then he left and I joined the team about 2 years ago, and until 6 months ago, it was just the two of us. Our lead was Peter Coles, and he also led the public policy and data science team. And then about 6 months ago, Kathy Lee joined our team. She's our first qualitative researcher. She had been at Airbnb for 4 years prior, working on user experience, and now she's bringing that expertise to the way that we work with our employees. We've also been able to welcome 2 new data scientists, Tanya and Anna. And so keep your eyes on airbnb.com/careers. We are currently opening up a role for an IO psychologist, and we hope to open up a data scientist role later in the year. So now I'll talk to you a little bit about how our team works on scaling people data. So if you've worked with people data, you might be familiar with these challenges. Some of the hardest parts about working with the people data is that the systems are not designed for integration. And I'll go into more depth into the 3 challenges here. So systems are not designed for integration. You're also working with highly sensitive employee data. And additionally, a lot of the data, it's not transactional, it's manually entered. So to address that first issue of systems not being designed for integration, I was able to work on our backend data infrastructure to bring together our HRIS as well as our ATS. So that's our applicant tracking system and our HR information system. This diagram kind of shows how that all works together. So the applicant tracking system provides us a database that's stored in Redshift. And so we take that data, dump it into an S3 bucket, and then bring in the data that we need into a local file system and then load that into Postgres. We have an API with the HRIS, so we're able to just bring that in daily through those reports. And we do most of our work in Postgres, denormalizing the data and setting up reporting tables that we then export to Tableau server to share insights out with the rest of the team. A lot of the work that we're doing on denormalizing the tables is done through Airflow. Airflow is a platform to programmatically author, schedule, and monitor data pipelines. The user interface is easy to visualize pipelines running in production. You can also monitor progress and troubleshoot issues. I've had to blur out some of the table names here, but each rectangle is a data table, and you can see quickly the dependencies of each of these tables. And you can also see quickly if the scripts have run successfully. Airflow was developed in-house at Airbnb, but it's now an open source project, so you can easily find it online. The Airflow scheduler also allows you to execute your tasks while following those specified dependencies. And so we were able to take some of the more complicated ATS, applicant tracking system, tables and combine them to make more usable reporting tables. So the second issue I talked about with people data challenge is that a lot of the data is very sensitive, and you need to be careful about how you're controlling that information. And we've been able to leverage Tableau to help us address that problem using user filters on our extracts. So if you're not familiar with Tableau, you create a data extract that runs behind the report. And Tableau allows you to create user filters to apply to that extract. So I can easily say, this HR business partner can only have access to the engineering data, and this HR business partner can only have access to the data in Asia. And that's made it very easy for us to scale out our reporting on this sensitive information. Additionally, it allows us to have our end users do some of their own data exploration in Tableau, because we're able to control the data that they have access to. Oh, another thing I wanted to call out is that we do have a separate Tableau server instance for this data. That's another nice feature Tableau offers. So we have our main Tableau server instance that the product team accesses, and then we have a separate one that's used for this sensitive employee data so that we can control the users that are accessing. The third challenge I discussed was that the data, people data, is often manually entered. And unlike product data where someone either visits a page or not, and if you have your logging correct, then you're accurately getting that information. With people data, it could be that someone mistyped a name or mistyped a department, and if your backend systems don't have proper IDing set up, then it can really lead to some messy data. So Tableau has also allowed us to build out data quality tools. So we have dashboards that surface these data anomalies. Specifically in recruiting, we're able to show, I think I have an example coming up next, some of the issues that come up commonly. And it allows our recruiters to proactively review their data. And coming from the head of recruiting, there's an expectation that every recruiter is responsible for the quality of their data, and we're able to help them maintain that accountability through these tools that we've built. So here is an example, a simple example of a piece of the dashboard. So this piece is showing a recruiter is able to filter to certain jobs, or if they're the recruiter on the application, they can see here if they have a candidate in the offer stage, but there's no offer created. And through Tableau, you're able to hover over the name of the candidate, and then it links through to our applicant tracking system where the recruiter can, in real time, fix any of the issues with that data. In addition to those data quality tools, we at Airbnb, not just in employee experience, but for the whole company, have implemented a course called Data University. And so Data University is, the vision is to empower every employee at Airbnb to make data-informed decisions by providing data education that scales by role and by team. here's an overview of what some of the classes look like. And so these classes are to empower our teams to be able to proactively use data and dive into it and understand it, so that the data science team isn't the bottleneck for a lot of the questions that they have. So the 100 level is more about data awareness. Here we teach classes on data-informed decision-making. We do an introduction to stats, as well as the various resources that are available here at Airbnb. Our 200 level dives more into those data resources. And so this is how you actually do the data collection and visualization. We have something here at Airbnb called Core Data. There's a lot of great blog posts on it. Core data are our denormalized tables on product data. That makes it easy for anyone in the company to ask questions like how many nights were booked in Berlin last week. We also teach classes on SQL, Tableau. We have an in-house visualization tool here called Superset that's also open source, so you can find some interesting information about that as well online. We have a tool called the Knowledge Repo that helps us scale out our data science insights. And so it's a collection of R Markdown and IPython notebooks to talk about the outcomes of our analyses and experiments. And then finally, we have another open source tool, ERF, that's our experimentation reporting framework. And the 200 level class dives in how to read those experiment results and work with that tool. At the highest level, the 300 level, this is more data at scale. And here we're teaching more about Hive, Airflow, which I mentioned earlier, R, Python, machine learning, proper data logging. These classes are often attended by our engineering team. So just to recap what I just talked through, how we've been able to scale people data. We have integrated our systems using ETL managed by Airflow. We've implemented access controls using Tableau user filters, and we're able to audit manually entered data with personalized dashboards, as well as democratizing data using our Data University resource here at Airbnb. And just to revisit the pyramid from earlier, in order to scale our people data, we have data infrastructure, data quality, how we think about metrics, and then that last top piece, A/B testing and prediction, the fun, shiny stuff. I'm going to talk about I will talk about how we've integrated some of that work by using R and Tableau. So here's the problem statement. In 2016, we had 6,600 technical phone screen interviews. And before I go into this problem statement, I'll give a quick overview of how interviewing works for our engineering team. On the engineering team, your first step is to submit an application. Second step is a review by our recruiting team. And once you pass that review, you're invited to do a technical phone screen. So it's very top of funnel for us. It's before you can come on site. So it's an important interview, but there's quite a few of them. And so it's one of the pieces of the interview process that we really needed to understand how to scale. So like I said, there is over 6,500 technical phone screen interviews in 2016, and we only had about 350 interviewers to do all of those phone screens. Additionally, each interview was manually assessed, and so the phone screens would take about an hour to complete. So one of the things that we wanted to control for as we scaled out this process was measuring the average hiring recommendation by the interviewer. So we needed to understand, were there certain interviewers that just said no all the time or just said yes all the time? Did we need to go in and proactively retrain those interviewers? So to do that, we wanted to measure the correlation of the interviewer's hiring recommendation with the final hiring recommendation. So of all the people that were eventually brought on site, were we able to correlate that back to this technical phone screen? So to do that, we looked at a couple of variables. One was the number of interviews by interviewer, as well as the hiring recommendation by the interviewer. So hiring recommendation by the interviewer is a 1 if they recommend hiring. It's a -1 if they do not recommend hiring. And so then we looked at the mean hiring recommendation by interviewer, which was the average. So the sum of all the hiring recommendations divided by the number of interviews by that interviewer. So here's a few examples. If the interviewer had done 4 interviews and said yes on all of them, your average would be a 1. If they said no on all of them, your average would be a -1. If they said yes on half and no on half, average would be 0. And if they said yes on 3 and no on 1, your average would be 0.5. And this is the final chart that we were able to share with our team. So each dot is an interviewer. Along the y-axis, you have the average hiring recommendation. So it can go anywhere from -1 to 1. And then along the x-axis, you have the total number of interviews. And then the gray bar is your standard deviation. Each dot is colored based on where they fall in the standard deviation. So that if they're above the standard deviation, it's light blue. If they're below, it's Roush. If they're within, it's purple. So what this is saying is the interviewer that did 100 interviews, that's purple, they fall within the mean of the recommendations. And then those that are blue are recommending yes more than the mean, and those that are red are recommending no. And so we're able to then look at each of those interviewers and understand, of the 40 interviews that they did, could they maybe have looked at the interview process in a different way? Ultimately, and so then we use that information to look at the hiring recommendation for the candidate down the road. So the final hiring recommendation by the interviewer and whether it's correlated with the candidate hired flag. So similar to the hiring recommendation, this was either a 1 or a -1. And so then we looked at the correlation using a Spearman relation. And so the way that looks in Tableau is you're able to easily connect to R and pass through your 2 variables and specify the correlation method that you want to use. And so this chart, we're now looking at, of that first chart, everyone that said no, were they correlated with the ultimate hiring decision? How much power did they have there? And again, you have on your left-hand side your correlation with the hiring decision, and on the x-axis, your total number of interviews. After we were able to share this out with the team, it was clear that there's a lot of variation within the interviews, and we're currently experimenting with a new tool that is, allows us to automate the technical phone screen. So for that, we're designing an experiment where we run our candidates through this process where they meet for an hour with this previous process where they meet for an hour with an engineer and do the technical phone screen versus our new process where they'll work with an automated system to see how we can hopefully reduce bias as well as help scale this entire process. Some of the additional predictive work that we're doing on our people analytics team, we're not only trying to scale our interview process, but understand, is that interview process even effective? So we want to start to look at, are we able to predict employee performance based on interview performance? And to do that, we have to wait for enough data to have the employee performance information at a large enough sample size to be able to understand any kind of impact. We're also doing a lot of work within the team predicting employee attrition using survival analysis. So last summer, we brought in, oh, I'm sorry, the slides are moving a little bit. Okay, so working on predicting employee attrition using a survival analysis. Last summer, we were able to bring in an intern to work on looking at different predictive features of attrition. And she took some heuristics such as how long someone had been at Airbnb, how many different managers that person had had, their promotion rate, and trying to understand what kind of impact those features have on the likelihood of someone leaving or staying with the company. We're also experimenting with our recruiting process to attract a more diverse talent pool. We've been partnering with a couple of consulting companies to work on the wording that we have in our job descriptions to understand how we're attracting different types of talent, different types of background, and hoping to implement the best practices there. And it looks like I'm finishing up a little earlier than I anticipated, but just to recap, we did an overview of people analytics at Airbnb. I talked about how we're scaling people analytics and did a demo of how we're using R in Tableau. I guess this will leave us with a little bit more time for questions than anticipated. So I'm hoping for some good questions.
Well, Belinda, hey, thank you for that excellent presentation. And well, we'll get started with today's Q&A session. I'm going to leave up this screen with information on Belinda in case you'd like to contact her following today's webinar. And I'd like to thank the audience for their participation. We've had a good many questions that have come in, and we'll do our best to get through all of them in the time remaining. So let's get started. Belinda, you talked a little bit about the differences between working with people data and production data. There must be, frankly, a lot of differences and probably some similarities. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. So working with the product data with our risk data science team was definitely different there than the current people data. So I talked through some of the challenges. We have manually entered data. Some of the other challenges are just sample size. We only have 4,000 employees, and so a lot of the work that we do is with our recruiting team, and that's because we have those larger sample sizes of the people that are applying to work here. On our talent side, it's been a challenge to look at things like attrition because we fortunately haven't had that many people leave. So trying to get any kind of statistical significance is one of the largest challenges. Some other challenges have been that we are working on our own data infrastructure, so we are not able to leverage some of the great work that the product team already has in place. However, we are able to leverage some of that. As I mentioned, we are using Airflow, which is used on our product data infrastructure. One of the other challenges is just being able to share out the work that we're doing because it is sensitive. Our peer review pool is a little bit smaller. On the product side, we have over 120 data scientists, and we have a pretty robust peer review system in place through GitHub. And our team is kind of limited to our small group of 6 people in our peer review process. But fortunately, we've been able to partner with some other companies in the Bay Area, some other people analytics teams, and share best practices with them. And so that's been super valuable for us.
Well, that's terrific. Oh, thank you for that great answer. You know, one of the audience members has asked a question that I think it must be very common, and that is many companies are just now dealing with setting up a corporate analytics center of excellence.
Right.
Did Airbnb go through that phase of having everything centralized in a central excellence group, or did you start immediately with the different groups? And tell us again how you're structured and how that reports into the organization.
Yeah, definitely. So our data science team started fairly early on with the company. Our former head of data science was the 8th employee. And so he was able to build the team in a centralized way. Initially, when I joined, there is 17 data scientists. And so at that point in time, we kind of knew what was happening on each part of the product, and it was more organic. But as we grew, it became clear pretty quickly that as data scientists started to focus on different areas, such as I was focused on risk, that we needed a way to share across our different sub-teams. So our data science team at Airbnb is still centralized in that we all report up to Elena Grewal, who's the head of data science here. But we are all embedded and focused on different sub-teams. So there's a risk team, there's a people analytics team, there's a search team, a growth team. And so the way that we've been able to facilitate that center of excellence is through not just our data university, but through the shared resources of the data science team. So when you join as a data scientist at Airbnb, you're put through something we call Moose Camp. And through that onboarding process, you learn about the different tools, as well as our knowledge repo, which I mentioned earlier. And so the knowledge repository leverages Git as well as R Markdown and Python notebooks for us to share information and get peer review on that. And so when the growth team wants to launch an experiment that will have an impact on the risk team, there's a process in place for them to tag the risk team on that experiment before they launch it, so that there's visibility and peer review on that work. And so within the data science team, we've been able to create this center of excellence using these different open source tools, knowledge repo, the experimentation reporting framework, ERF. And then outside of data science, we've been able to scale to our stakeholders through Data University. And so the product managers all go through Data University. They're familiar with the tools. They're familiar with how to access all of this information as well.
Well, thank you. That was terrific. Great explanation. Now, one of our audience members observes, and I think this must also be pretty common, that moving from data science on more objective product terms to using data science on employee data is sometimes a little controversial. And if I recall correctly, you were the number 2 employee in your people group. Was there a particular struggle in convincing management that they should apply data science to the people measures, or what sort of challenges did you face in doing that?
That's a great question. And it definitely was a challenge to learn this whole new side of the business, and HR practices are very specific. And fortunately, our head of employee experience is very data driven and dedicated to making making data-informed decisions. At Airbnb, we talk more about data-informed rather than data-driven because you don't always have data that you need, and so you can work from more of an informed point of view. But yes, partnering, one of the biggest challenges was just learning all of the lingo in the HR space, HR and recruiting space, as well as the best practices in that space. And so I've been fortunate in that my coworkers and stakeholders are great to partner with as we've been ramping up on that information. But yeah, there was definitely, when I was interviewing for the position, I had to do quite a bit of research because they had originally wanted someone with more HR experience. But now our team has more of a balance of people with HR experience and people with the product data experience.
Right, and now you're the pro.
Yeah, right. Not quite. Getting there.
So dealing with HR data, there are all sorts of privacy issues. Are you pulling in data directly from your applicant tracking system? And if so, how are you dealing with the issues of privacy for folks that aren't yet employees?
Absolutely, especially with the GDPR coming up. So those are the new regulations in Europe. We have to be very careful about how we're pulling in that information. And fortunately, our applicant tracking system, they've been great partners in how we handle that data. So for the GDPR regulations, they're handling a lot of the retention rules around that. So we can only retain certain information for a certain amount of time. But we also have to be aware of those regulations and how we store the data. So if the ATS is appropriately deleting the information, but we have it saved on our side, then obviously we wouldn't be following the rules of the law. So we are careful to also implement those same rules. On the sensitivity side, I'm guessing that that person might be referring specifically to protected class data, like age, race, ethnicity. And so, yes, with that, we have to be very cautious of which data we bring in. We only bring in data that we intend to act on. So if we don't have, if we have a hypothesis, but we don't have an action plan, then we won't bring in the data. And we also are very careful to limit the people that have access to the information. So something like performance reviews is not something our entire people analytics team will have access to. It'll be the person working with that data that will then work to anonymize it so that we can provide peer review. But not everybody has access to all of the information. And it's through having this separate infrastructure that we're able to control that access as well.
Thank you. That was a great explanation. You know, one of the nice things about data science as it is matured is it's become much more of a team sport. So the audience wanted to know, you know, what are you going to do with an IO psychologist on your team? And a little bit beyond that, do you bring in line of business folks to work with you also on your projects?
That's a great question. With the IO psychologist, we have not yet had this person join our team, but and I'm not as familiar with the work as my manager Susan is, but she recently went and spoke at the IO Psych conference in Chicago. I believe that was 2 weeks ago. And some of the work that we hope to partner with them on is helping identify roles that we're missing, skills assessments, as well as I had mentioned some of the predictive work that we want to do is assessing whether our interview process is even predictive of employee performance. And so we would partner closely with that person on that work. As far as line of business people, we work super closely with our HR business partners as well as our business leaders. One of the advantages of rolling up to a centralized data science team is that I get to partner closely with our head of data science to understand our data science org. So how are we recruiting within data science? Is there data that we should be gathering? And so she's asking these great questions about how to improve her organization from a people standpoint that we're able to scale out to our other functions, such as marketing. as well as
Okay.
understanding our headcount and how our recruiting team is achieving those goals.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Terrific. Now, I can imagine that in the process of recruiting and hiring, there are a lot of I want to call them handwritten notes, but obviously they're not handwritten. They're keyboard entered notes,
Right.
but all the same, they're very unstructured. So are you using a text analysis tool? Are you exploiting that really unstructured text data?
We are not yet. We've been checking out a couple of different tools that we might leverage. We have done some ad hoc analyses on the text, so understanding if there's certain words in performance reviews that are more common to certain genders, specific genders. That's one of the one-off analyses we've done. But over the past 2 years, we've really just been trying to get that. Let me go back to the slide. The data infrastructure, quality, and metrics in place. So we're just now getting to the point where we can start to work on things like text analysis. And yeah, we've been looking at a few tools, and it's a fairly new field, people analytics. And so how we're leveraging the text is something that we're learning how we want to do. So for the most part, with the data that we do want to understand, we work closely with our applicant tracking system to create drop downs to control the data entry piece of it so that we can not be bothered by typos and things like that.
Right. Tell us a little bit about the feedback loop. That was such an interesting display about looking at the HR interviewers' performance against the standard deviation. How do you go about delivering that feedback to them? Is it through HR management? Is it through some sort of reporting? Do you do training? How do you make that actionable to change HR's behavior?
Yeah, so we have a great relationship with our recruiting strategy and operations team. So within our recruiting team, there's a small group of people, program managers, and one of those program managers manages the interview process. And so they're implementing trainings, they're doing feedback with specific interviewers to understand how that person is providing, to improve their training. If we do see outliers, then the recruiting operations team will go back and work with the specific interviewers to understand why that might be happening. They're also our partners on data quality. So without the buy-in from that team, we could build all the dashboards in the world that show poor data quality, but without their support to go back and work with specific recruiters on that data quality and help them understand the importance of the data they're providing, we wouldn't be making any of the progress that we are.
Terrific. Oh, thanks for that information. You know, in the area of, I think that the whole application of data science to employee data and applicant data is really a fascinating field. And I saw that you had a section of your team that was focused on maintaining employment, trying to prevent attrition. Can you tell us a little bit about the metrics that you use to measure attrition and how you built that model, and what sort of accuracy and precision did you get?
Great question. So the original survival analysis that we built last summer, we were working with someone that was on an internship, so we didn't provide all of the data that we have because it is so sensitive. But she was still able to achieve a level of accuracy to understand a few of the major heuristics that can be predictive of attrition. One of which was understanding how many managers a person had, which we were, I guess, in retrospect, not that surprised about, but not something we had expected to be predictive of attrition, but it kind of shows the volatility of that person's career trajectory. So if someone had multiple managers, then it can be predictive of the fact that they might leave. Some of the other things we looked at that are more obvious are tenure, promotion, rate. Let's see. We wanted to make sure there wasn't any major differences based on gender, ethnicity, and so we included those as well as the level that a person was, which team they're on, sub-team that they might be working with. So part of it was understanding what's predictive of attrition, and then another part was making sure there wasn't certain demographic information that was predictive, because we didn't want to see any kind of difference between those groups. And so the level of accuracy was not high enough to really action on that information. So we'll be revisiting it when she comes back as a full-time employee this summer. So yeah, we're looking forward to having a little bit more data to work with. Obviously, we don't want more people to quit, but we do want more data. So we're just kind of waiting around for that.
Okay, work in process. How about the flip side? You talked, or one of your diagrams talked a little bit about using your studies for career development and promotion. What sort of models have you been able to generate in that area?
Yeah, so that's been a lot of our work with collaborative work with the qualitative researcher, Kathy, and my manager has also worked on that as well. So we're using more of our company surveys for that information. So we have engagement surveys that we send out about twice a year to understand how the employees are feeling about working here. So it asks questions like, do you see yourself working here in a year, in 2 years? Have you had a major career conversation with your manager in the past 6 months? Questions about belonging, because that is related to our mission. And so the two of them were able to, they put together regression models based on that information to understand which of those questions are most predictive of retention and feelings about growth and career opportunity. And in addition to those surveys, they're also doing small group conversations and leading more of that qualitative research side of things to understand and build the story around career growth here at Airbnb. And based on that information, we're able to understand how the employee experience team can focus their programs. So our learning and development team is able to take, having a career conversation within the past 6 months with your manager is highly predictive of your feelings of growth. Well, we should be teaching managers to have those career conversations and how to have those in a productive way. So it helps drive the prioritization of those programs as well.
Oh, terrific. Okay, and so I heard you say you're doing internal surveying, and that's obviously one form of benchmarking. Are there general industry benchmarks that you can also use? Is there an external data source that you could tell us about?
Yeah, so our head of employee experience, Beth Axelrod, joined us 2 years ago, or I guess a year and a half ago. And she came from eBay and before that McKinsey. And so she has connected us with all these great resources to have more of that benchmarking. Before she joined, we hadn't been partnering as much with those external resources, but we recently partnered with McKinsey on their Women in the Workplace survey. So with that, they're able to provide us benchmarking on other tech companies in the Bay Area so that we can see we're mostly for those looking at gender and ethnicity diversity information. So how are we tracking against our peers? What are some best practices that they've found? And then obviously on the compensation side of things, we also partner with external sources to understand where our comp stands compared to other companies. But yeah, for the most part, it is challenging to get people analytics benchmarking data. You really need to participate in one of these surveys and studies to have access to that information. And as I mentioned before, we do have relationships with other people analytics groups here in the Bay Area. And that's been extremely valuable for us to understand how they're looking at this information and sharing back with their teams.
Okay, yeah, I can understand that. That's very interesting. Thank you. On the technical side, your architecture, is that Postgres solution a consolidated data warehouse or data lake, or do you have a separate consolidated data warehouse someplace?
No, for our people data, it's just that Postgres solution. Obviously, on the product side, we have a much more robust solution, but until a couple of months ago, our data was so small that it could fit on an iPhone. So we didn't need much more than that. And so, yeah, we've just been leveraging that Postgres database for now, and it does provide some of the analytical functions that we don't have access to with the more robust system used on the product side.
So okay, so are you doing cleanup and prep as part of that process? Or, for example, I know that Tableau has a new Tableau Prep, data prep and cleanup function. Have you used that? Are you using it?
We haven't switched over to that yet. I think we're a little bit behind in some upgrades, and so we upgraded recently, and it's something that we have on our roadmap to look into. But for the most part, we're doing all the prep and cleanup on Postgres, and leveraging Airflow to understand all those different dependencies and all the joins that we're pulling together. So Airflow kind of provides that visibility, but I think similarly, the Tableau Prep will have visibility into those dependencies.
Okay, and I saw that you had an in-house visualization tool. What made you turn to Tableau then as your visualization tool?
Great question. I teach the Data University class on visualization, and that is always the first question: why Tableau versus Superset, which is our in-house tool. So Superset is easily connected to our Hive data warehouse, but it doesn't provide the same robust visualizations as Tableau. I mean, Tableau has been around for, I think, 20 years, 15 or 20 years. And so the visualization is a little bit more robust, and being a company founded by designers, that piece of it is very important. Additionally, Tableau provides the security flexibility that our specific team needs. That hasn't been built out yet in Superset. We don't have the ability to control on the row level who has access to what data. And so until we have that, it won't be possible for us to even consider moving over to that tool. Additionally, just having our separate data warehouse, Tableau was super easy to connect to and get up and going.
Well, Belinda, thank you. Thank you. Great answers to some very good questions. And for those of you that asked questions today that weren't answered, we'll be sending all the unanswered questions to Belinda and the Tableau team so they can follow up with you after today's webinar. Now, I have just a few quick announcements. If you'd please mark your calendars for May 17th, that's our next DSC webinar, which will be combining human intelligence with machine learning for NLP and speech. Oops, excuse me, I seem to have gone. Oh, now I'm out of. See, here we are. Okay. And that's going to be sponsored by Figure 8. Also, today's taping will be available for on-demand viewing later today, and you can find that on the home page of Data Science Central in the Webinar tab, located at the top of the page. Now, all right, so this brings today's webinar to a close, and I'd like to thank our audience for their attendance and thoughtful questions, and a special thanks again to Tableau for their sponsorship, and particularly our speaker today, Belinda Bennett, for her insight into today's topic. Well, this is Bill Voorhees. I'm very pleased to have been your host for today's event. I look forward to seeing you again on May 17th. Have a great day.